Good afternoon. My name is Greg Gaines. I am the program director for the Catholic Charities Mr. Rogers Garden Program. I am a graduate of the University of Michigan Flint here. I am also a former General Motors mid-level manager. I retired from GM in 2004 as Assistant Superintendent of Production. And I was an attendee to the Global Summit on Metropolitan Agriculture in 2010, where I presented to the world the work that I do with the youth here in Genesee County. Give you a little background of how I got to be where I'm at today as far as program director of a urban gardening program. I can tell you this much, I turned this job down 3 times. I said I wasn't going to do it. That's what I said. But I'm here to tell you that if God got something for you to do, you're going to do it, whether you want to or not. So here I am. And the rest is history. But I've been training young people in urban gardening now for approximately 22 years. If you want to say that I was the starter of the urban gardening here in Flint, Michigan, yes, I can take claim to that, because I started with one garden probably 22 years ago, just for the fact that when I started out in the program, I noticed that the young men, at that time we only had young men, the young men in the program didn't have anything to do in the summertime when they got out of school, except for to roam the streets. So we come together with an idea that we would start a little garden somewhere, and we would hire these young people to train them in gardening. And we were blessed that we had some land given to us by Bishop Dunlap out in Davison on the Pier Road, and we had 6 young men out there in those gardens. And at that time I received some funding from Community Foundation here in Flint, and we were paying these young people $1.25 an hour. And we would just, I didn't know anything about gardening. I mean, you know, I didn't know a weed from a green. But I had, again, I was blessed that I had an older gentleman call me the night before we started the garden program, and he asked me, he said, "You're Greg Gaines?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, I'd like to come work for you." Well, I'm always looking for volunteers in the program. And I said, "Oh, here we go, another somebody to want to come volunteer for me," because I was really looking for somebody to give me some expertise on how you plant stuff. And the gentleman said, I asked him, I said, "Well, you got any special skills?" He says, "Yes, I'm a master gardener, and I like to fell through the floor." You know, because that's exactly what I needed, you know. And him and I got together, and he taught me a lot of stuff, and thus the garden program was born. And the following year, I started looking at some of the vacant properties that were around here in the city of Flint, and we started planting gardens, going into the neighborhoods, and started to plant gardens in those neighborhoods. And I found out that whatever neighborhood we went into, I would elicit the support of all of the people in that one community block. We got to buy in, especially from, if it was a vacant land, a vacant piece of property, and it was 2 houses on both sides, we went to those people and asked them, you know, could we use their water, and could we store some of our equipment in their garage and everything while the kids would start to maintain the garden. And we did elicit the buy-in from all those community neighbors. And when the garden started to produce, we didn't have any other thing to do with the produce that was in the garden, so we just turned all that whole garden over to that community. So thus was born the Urban Gardening Initiative. And then it started picking up with a lot more organizations in the city of Flint of doing urban gardening. So I was glad to be a part of that. The program has grown dramatically down through the years. This past summer, I hired a total of 91 young people throughout Genesee County. I now operate 3 different garden projects within the county. I have one garden project which is about 2.5 acres out in Davison on Irish Road. I have another garden project with 4 gardens and a hoop house over at Ebenezer Ministries on Center Road. And I have another garden project about 1.5 acres out at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church on Coldwater Road. So between those three gardens, we were able to hire and train young men and women for the Summer Jobs Program. Also, approximately 2 years ago, I opened up a Mr. Rogers Culinary School, where we now also train these young people not only on the growing of their produce, the planting, the weeding, the seeding, the hoeing, and the marketing, because we sell our produce now down at Flint Farmers Market on Thursdays and Saturdays. With that, the young people also alternate in going to culinary school on Thursdays and Saturdays, and this gives us an opportunity to not only have these young people plant their produce, but also it gives them opportunity to learn how to properly prepare and cook the very produce that they are growing. And it has been a tremendous success. Along with that, I also do have a landscaping crew that goes around the city, and we maintain, during the summer months, we maintain all of the gateway entrances throughout the city. You may have seen in your travels during the summer young men in red t-shirts and hats at the gateways, where we cut all the grass and maintain all the flowers and everything, and all of the mediums here in Genesee County. So with that, the Mr. Rogers program, we are going on very strong. She is now attending her first year down at North Carolina A&T Technical College, majoring in agriculture. So we are very proud of this young lady, Sierra Haney. I am Greg Gaines, Program Director of the Catholic Chambers Mr. Rogers Program. I've been working with Teen Quest since its beginning. Last year, the Mr. Rogers Program employed 67 Teen Quest graduates. In fact, many of them were returning employees. Our SY employees grow produce in our urban gardens. Our students have been selling the produce. That is the stand down at Flint Farmers Market. We also added a culinary school to teach the employees how to cook the produce that they grow. Our employees are empowered through their work experience. I've seen many of my former employees go on to great success in college and beyond. That's incredible for the young people in our region. The Regional Chamber's Teen Quest leadership training and SYI enrollment has had a large impact on a number of young people's lives.
I'm Sierra Haney, and when I participated in the Genesee Regional Chamber of Commerce Teen Quest training in the 9th grade, I had no idea it would have an impact on my future. The training helped me get my first job with Catholic Charities Mr. Rogers program, and that's where I met Mr. Gaines. Working with the Mr. Rogers program through the Regional Chamber Summer Youth Initiative has helped me gain valuable experience and leadership skills. This will be my 5th year working with the program, and I am proud to say that each year I took on greater responsibility and ultimately became a team leader. I am a senior now, and throughout my high school career I've had numerous jobs, including working at Applewood Estate on the horticulture staff. I credit Teen Quest for giving me the skills I need to be successful.
We're very proud of that young lady. My vision for the program is that I would like to take this program to on a national level. It could be easily replicated across the nation. And looking back, especially when we started when I had the hoop house built, I was fortunate enough to receive a national grant from the Kellogg Foundation to build this hoop house. But one of the obstacles that we ran into when we first started out to build a hoop house, because my idea was to put this hoop house on a vacant piece of property here in the city of Flint? Well, we ran into a lot of obstacles due to the zoning laws. We could not get around the zoning laws to get a permit to build this hoop house here in the city of Flint. So I turned my direction toward Burton, Michigan, and I went there to their planning commission and spoke before them, and then they told me that I would have to come back and do a presentation. And but their zoning laws were not as hard as the zoning laws in the city of Flint. And Steve Arellano was there with me, and him and I went back to the Burton Planning Commission, and we did a presentation before the Burton Planning Commission, and we were allowed to build this hoop house at Ebenezer Ministries on the land that they had given us, and we got the permit to put that hoop house up. So that's how the hoop house got put up in Burton. I know that there's probably 1 or 2 more hoop houses here in the city of Flint, and there's one out in Beecher that Jackie King and his wife Dora owns. But you know, what I would like to see, especially with all of the vacant properties that we have here in the city of Flint, is that we need, and looking at our kids, because I employ young people between the ages of 14 through 18. As you can see with that video, especially in the hoop house with all those greens, those were mustard greens, turnip greens, and collard greens, and we were growing those in February. You know, just like right now, we've cleared out our hoop house for the summer crops, and we have now planted the winter crops in. And I still have young people that are working after school hours, working in the hoop house from 4 to 7:30 in the evening. This will give these young people a job, you know, that we can hire them all summer and all year round. But one of the things that we need to do, especially here in the city of Flint, is we need to get those zoning laws relaxed, or whereas that we could put up and utilize more of the vacant properties here in the city of Flint, other than just utilizing the vacant properties here in the summertime. As I did my travels this summer, you know, and I've noticed that a lot of people have now started to do their own gardens, and they're starting to use these vacant properties, but that's only for a period of the growing season for the summer. During the wintertime, these properties set vacant. If we could get more hoop houses put up on these properties, that will allow us to hire not only more young people to grow the produce, but also give a lot more other people jobs that they could earn or make a good living off of, just selling their produce, because we have a great farmers market here in the city of Flint, and it's something that's an opportunity not only for the citizens of our community, but also for the young people as well. Steve.
About this project, Five Borough Farm, which I worked on at my last job, the Design Trust for Public Space. It's a nonprofit in New York. It's called Five Borough Farm. And we were asked to look at urban farming in New York City by an urban farm called the Red Hook Community Farm. They're based in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. In 2003, they took over an asphalt ball field that was underutilized and turned it into a 3-acre farm. And the project they wanted to do was to look at 3 things really. Number one was to try and get a sense of what is going on with urban agriculture in New York. They knew that there was so much activity there now. Pretty much everyone we talked to would tell you that 5 or 6 years ago, you knew exactly who the urban farmers and gardeners were, you knew where they were, you knew their projects, and now it was impossible to keep track. There were so many new projects sprouting up all the time. So one was just to get a handle on what's out there. 2 was to try to understand better, what does urban agriculture do? What is its impact on the young people that Greg works with, on all the people who are involved with it, who are farming, who are buying food from these farms, on the communities that these farms are in? What are the benefits of urban agriculture? Because, again, everyone who does it had stories about people whose lives had changed because they were involved with urban agriculture, but there wasn't a lot of other information behind that. And we have a mayor now in New York who really wants to know the data. They want to know numbers, they want to know dollar values, and that didn't exist very much in New York City. So that was the second part. And then the third part was, how do we use that information to influence policy? How do we use that information to change zoning laws or to get elected officials to pass laws to support urban agriculture and to allow people to do the work that they're doing with some support? So I'm going to show you some images about what we learned doing this project. The first thing is that urban agriculture is everywhere in New York City. People have reclaimed every type of land that's available, whether it's next to elevated rail lines or highways, every sliver of land on rooftops that's been left over or neglected or unwanted. People are farming there, people are growing food. There are more than 700 urban farms and gardens that are growing food in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And I think that number surprised a lot of people, just the sheer amount of activity that's going on. And one of the great things about urban agriculture is everyone, all kinds of people are interested. It really cuts across race, class, neighborhood. But what we found is that it really is concentrated in some specific neighborhoods, and that really has to do with the history of New York. In the 70s and in the 80s, the city lost hundreds of thousands of people, and there were whole neighborhoods that were very similar to what's happening here in Flint. A lot of abandonment, arson, disinvestment, and vacant land. And it's those neighborhoods where people started just on their own, without any kind of city support or foundation support. People just started taking over these vacant lots and turning them into gardens, sometimes growing food, sometimes flowers, sometimes just for people to hang out. And those neighborhoods now are where you see the highest concentration of urban agriculture. Because in response to all that grassroots activity, the city did establish a program that allowed people to take legal control. They established another program called Green Thumb, which is now the biggest program in the nation in terms of the number of gardens that they help maintain and support. And then there are all these nonprofit that's sprouted up, and that network is also really strong now. So you have this very resourceful, experienced group of activists and growers, plus this other infrastructure that's there to support them. But largely in poor neighborhoods and in minority neighborhoods. And what we saw is that there's this mix of need and opportunity. So these are neighborhoods where you have high dropout rates in school, you have high obesity rates, you have very low rates of vegetable or fruit eating, but at the same time you still have a high concentration of land, which is what people need to start these projects. So that seemed to us like one of the best things about urban agriculture is that you have this thing that addresses a lot of different needs, urgent needs for people in the neighborhoods, but you have this opportunity through the kind of activity that happens in urban agriculture and the available land. So when I say the kind of activity, the maybe the biggest finding for us in all the interviews we did and all the visits we did to farms and gardens, talking to policymakers, foundation folks, farmers and gardeners, is that urban agriculture is about much more than just food. And Greg talked a lot about that with the young people that he's hiring and training. Obviously, food is very important to all of these projects, but urban agriculture is also about training people with job skills. It's about teaching people about healthy eating. It's about capturing stormwater, as the last panelists were talking about, and turning food waste, which would go into landfills and cost the city a lot of money, into compost. So all of these social, health, economic, educational, ecological benefits are part of what makes urban agriculture a really promising way to revitalize cities. And let's see if we can get any of these things to load. I can show you some of these graphics. Or it might just be quicker to do this. Oh. So I mentioned we were looking at benefits of urban agriculture. One of the things we did was look at, okay, what are all the different kinds of activities that you find at farms and gardens around New York City? And it's a wide range, from in-school and after-school programs to planting, to composting, to raising chickens and other kinds of livestock, to more community-oriented programs like getting people involved as volunteers, having harvest festivals that gather people, programs specifically designed to engage women or young people or seniors or a mix of all of those, sales at farmers markets and to restaurants. So all of this whole universe of stuff, our team looked at what are some of the studies out there that demonstrate that these kinds of activities lead to certain kinds of benefits. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel or prove stuff from scratch. We could just say, look, there's been a lot of work that shows for these kinds of specific activities, you can pretty much say there's some direct results in terms of health, social, economic, and ecological. So this was really just try to provide a framework that links the activities, especially for the people who are doing them. They know intuitively, we're making this impact. But then we could actually point to some scientific literature, some social science literature that makes this direct link. I'll just talk a little bit about policy, since it's something that Greg raised. A couple of key things in New York that are probably the same here. We don't have the same issues with zoning, just by accident, because there used to be a lot of farming in New York City. The zoning says you can do urban agriculture just about anywhere. Not because anyone thought, oh, this is a good practice, we're going to support it. It just happened to be there already when this thing started taking off. But a couple other challenges. Number one is there are a lot of agencies in New York, city agencies, that already are involved with urban agriculture. Obviously, the Department of Sanitation is producing a lot of compost. The Department of Parks is helping to manage hundreds of farms and gardens. The Department of Environmental Protection, which is doing a lot of work about stormwater, they have more than $2 billion that they are slated to invest in all of these small-scale strategies over the next few decades to try to capture the runoff that Susanna and Jill were talking about. Not through giant plants that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and take a lot of land, but through small stuff, like what they were talking about. Green strategies that can fit in very small spaces. So all of these agencies are doing stuff that are related to urban agriculture, but none of them feel like urban agriculture is part of their mission. So there's usually no resources or staff or expertise for these agencies to understand how could I be using programs that already exist and get more bang for my investment, because we know that there's all these benefits that urban agriculture produces, and I'm trying to get some of those benefits through the programs that I'm doing in my agency, but I'm not making that link, and I'm not talking to other agencies, and there's no home for this activity within city government, so no one takes final responsibility, or no one's looking at the big picture to see how can we activate this more. So that was probably the biggest challenge, was to try to understand how could we help city government make that link, so that they could bring more resources to urban agriculture, whether it's land, or soil, or materials, or funding. I would say the second biggest challenge was that we found out very early on it's not really a level playing field for urban agriculture for people who want to do this. Even though most of the activity is in poor neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, there are a handful of groups that, because they have certain resources and connections, they're much better equipped to get grants, to know people within city government who can help them with resources, to get projects off the ground. And there's a big majority of projects who just don't have access to those resources or the information they need to kind of support their projects the way they want to. So we came up with a series of recommendations on how city government could address some of these challenges, some of these obstacles that are holding back projects like Mr. Rogers' Garden Program. They boil down to a couple categories, and I'll just be really quick. And Stephen, I know, is also working on some of these same issues in Flint. But the first is we recommend that there be some kind of urban agriculture plan, that someone within city government, whether it's the mayor or one of these agencies, they need to take the leadership, or an elected official, they need to decide that urban agriculture needs to become more an official part of city government. And there's concerns about that. There's some gardeners who would say, look, we did this mostly on our own. We don't need city government telling us stuff about what to do. But at the same time, I think if we want government to help increase resources, and government controls a lot of land and controls other kinds of resources, urban agriculture is an important part of the city's landscape and its everyday life and the communities where it's taking place. And there needs to be a formal way for that to be integrated into government. For agencies to talk to each other, for the city to make some decisions about where can we promote this, what kind of funding can we provide for this, how do we leverage the programs that already exist so that they're also supporting urban farmers and gardeners. I think some of the other recommendations are maybe not as relevant to Flint, but I guess the one that I mentioned in terms of the challenge of leveling the playing field, there are a couple things we try to recommend. One is to the funding community. I think we wanted to demonstrate to all the foundations out there, and maybe this is true in Flint, people are starting to understand, oh, there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of buzz around urban agriculture, we want to get involved. But there wasn't a real understanding about what's the best way to do that. So we tried to steer those foundations to a couple of basic things. One was about organizing. You know, there's a really strong network among farmers and gardeners to talk to each other, to share resources. And we thought if you could support that, if you could provide funding for farmers and gardeners to, say, hire community organizers to help them get the word out in their neighborhoods about what they're doing, in addition to the people who are doing the farming. If you could have a series of community within, let's say, a couple of neighborhoods, if there are a number of farms, if you could support meetings among those farms and gardeners to figure out ways to work together to share resources. If you could maybe encourage them to apply for grants in partnerships, not just as single operations, that would be a way to support the networking that already happens and that is vital to farming in New York City. So I think maybe I'll stop there and then let Stephen pick up on what's happening in Flint.
It's pretty bad here. You know, we have. I mean, just to remember that how desperate people are out there and how food security is, you know, a genuine issue. 20% of our children are food insecure. You know, don't know where their next meal is going to come. At least, you know, once a month. We have extreme, the combination of extreme obesity, high levels of obesity and malnutrition in the same people. That's a really difficult situation. On top of it, we have not the resources to, or the tax base to manage our city systems. And so looking at it from maps and the planning angle is really difficult for me to really wrap my mind around how all of that is going to benefit somebody who is in their neighborhood staring at a bunch of vacant land. And with urban agriculture, the most powerful thing about it is all of a sudden here's a space in a neighborhood and somebody who isn't connected to the power structure, who does not have an in with funders or can't bend the rules to get somebody to help them do that, they can go out of their house and do this work. And there's a lot of support structure for it. I was a co-founder of Edible Flint here in Flint. We do intro to gardening education, we do tilling services, we do compost delivery, we do collective purchase of seeds to reduce the cost of that. We do crop mobs to go to different people's gardens and weed them real fast and get them in shape. We do collective marketing of produce at the farmer's market under the Edible Flint label, in which anyone's invited to be a member of that co-op and sell their produce, provided that they use natural and organic growing methods. Not that they have to be certified, but that there's an honor agreement among the co-op members that you will use, not use pesticides and herbicides and synthetic fertilizers on your food. All the soil tests for those gardens are made available to the customers at the desk or at the farm stall. And so, for me, it's a real grassroots movement here in Flint, and it's one of the few things that I've really seen just be that empowering. Now, it's different for us than it is in New York. New York is a city where people would like to move to. There's lots of options. There's a lot of diversity and diverse cultures and immigrant populations who bring growing skills to the table when they move. We have a legacy in Flint where many people moved to Flint during difficult economic times to get away from agricultural backgrounds. We have considerations that the preponderance of vacant land, the highest concentrations are in the lowest income neighborhoods that are predominantly black or low income white folks. And they hear the term urban agriculture and they say, so you want sharecropping in Flint? There's a lot of healing that needs to go on in the urban agriculture movement. It's a social movement. But at the same time, I think it's one of the few strategies that I've seen in really doing a cross-section of community development and having the privilege to see so many different proposals as a funder of what everybody's trying to do in this city. It's one of the few things that seems to have the potential to hit. It has the building community fabric factor. It has the potential to create jobs and build job skills in young people like Greg has done so successfully. It's has a care ethic. We have studies that show that violence within near community gardens is actually, within 1,000 meters of a community garden, you're not going to see as much violence, and that ring goes outward. Those people are eyes on the street in Flint. Criminals don't want to walk down those streets because they're going to be seen. They just soon choose another street. So, I mean, through this practice, we have been able to kind of touch on so many of the things. Most of all, when we talk about access to food for food insecure population, it's a lot more than just having a grocery store for us in Flint. We're a generation or two away from people who even know how to prepare food. What do you do with fresh food? I don't know how to cook a turnip. I don't know what to do with fresh food if I was able to get it. So we have a real lack of knowledge just about some of those fundamentals. We have severe challenges in transportation for people to get to that food. And we have done a lot of things, including subsidizing. We use a Double Up Food Bucks program. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but anybody who uses their food stamp card can get an even match of what they spend for Michigan-grown produce. So you go buy your meat with your food stamps at the farmer's market, and they swipe your Double Up Food Bucks card. You buy $20 worth of meat, they give you $20 worth of credit, and you can go buy Michigan fruits and vegetables with that. That has made Flint Farmers Market the largest redeemer of food stamps for markets, including Eastern Market. I don't know if it's changed since the rollout last year, but for being such a small market and servicing that many low-income folks, we have a different kind of situation. We also don't have the large, I think what I've seen in Detroit, for example, where there's also a really fantastic movement and a lot of great leaders doing the same work. It's a much bigger situation in Detroit, and you have, people are moving into, like young folks, even from the suburbs. Young white folks hipsters are moving to Detroit because it's cool to do urban agriculture work and be connected to that movement there. We don't have that same kind of movement here. And I think that there are some racial tensions that are built up about people wanting access to land in Detroit, and who is not getting access to land. And that's kind of, I'm not used to having an audience that I don't have to convince that urban agriculture is important. So it's kind of hard, but I guess I could flow into starting to talk about policy, and then start, I really want to have a discussion here more than continuing to talk about it. But our biggest challenges, like Greg was talking about, the first 2,000 Flint went up on Philadelphia Avenue. It was half a block from the former Buick City site. Started by Freddie McNeil and Carolyn Meekins, and it took us 2 years. It took her 2 years of going back and forth with city government, getting small grants and scraping all of her money together to get further architectural drawings for snow load and wind load and all those kinds of things, to put a hoop house at the end of a vacant street to give kids in her neighborhood something to do. And we know it's against the zoning. It's a gray area at this point. But Flint residents need to be able to look at something as like producing food in the city for their own benefit, to subsidize their health and nutrition and their income. They need to be able to say, yeah, my city government supports me in doing that. I'm not asking for forgiveness rather than permission. I'm just going to do it because, this could be a place where, illegal activity is happening. It could be, a place where all kinds of bad things are happening. But instead, I'm putting a garden here and taking care of the neighborhood kids, and you're going to put me through a hassle. And so this building this antagonism with city government now responding. We have raised hoop houses starting on Friday and finishing on Sunday. And the reason is that we don't get a stop work order because there's no city government working that day. And what happens on Monday? Big orange sticker on the front of the hoop house, stop work. Well, we already stopped. But you know, it's been more of a look the other way at this point than it has been, hey, that's really awesome that you guys are doing something with that. The same, so there's a lot of policy issues related to zoning and what will allowable uses be. There have been public listening sessions to talk about these things, and proposals already brought to the Planning Commission in which they were, rejected, for a number of reasons. The city does have some resistance. I think some of the people who are opposed to urban agriculture in the city, most of the opposition that I see, if I drive them out to Ebenezer Ministries and they go watch Greg work with kids at the hoop house and grow vegetables and do all this great work, they're like, oh, well, yeah, I'd love to have that in my neighborhood. I thought you meant like, row crops of corn covering every vacant parcel in the city or something. And so I think there's a lot of lack of understanding. There certainly has to be, the rainwater thing is huge. Access to water is a real issue. Pooling resources and those kinds of things and that kind of support from the city would be great. I also think land tenure, access to land is an enormous issue. And it's one of the ones that, to me, it's one of the greatest injustices that those of us who have stuck around in Flint, most of the people who could have left here probably did. And if they didn't, it's because they love this city. They're dedicated to it. Some folks feel trapped here. But we're all here together. And to have an opportunity to own more land and to care for that land should be a basic right of the people who have decided to stay here. First and foremost, not what's your plan, but what do you guys want to do with some land? And urban farmers, prospective urban farmers, and folks who want to do gardens, yeah, it's fine as a temporary use maybe, if you want to just lease the lot from government agencies that hold the land for $1. And what you're doing is saving them having to pay someone to mow it. So you're actually adding value to that land. You can't put a hoop house up on that structure because you don't own the land. You're going to put a $6,000, $7,000 structure on a piece of land that you don't own. You're going to make that kind of investment. And then all of the larger parcels that look really nice to farm, they're being held for future development without specifics about what that development is going to be. They're being, there's a lot of discretion happening that isn't policy. There's a lot of saying, 20 years from now, this land might be really valuable. And so we're gonna wait and not let you who have been dreaming of doing this on a parcel like this, we're just gonna have you wait on that dream and not do it. What we've seen, the access to land thing needs to be a point of clarification for the policy, and it needs to be a community discussion, because we are not having a productive dialogue in this community about what that should be. We are not, it's a really sad situation, because when you start looking at the city of Flint through the lens of urban agriculture and the impact that it can have on the youth, the impact that those youth have on their parents when they take home their fresh vegetables and start bringing fresh produce into the home, the reduction in type 2 adult onset diabetes. We have seen kids who have radically changed their diet and they're not taking their Ritalin anymore. There's a lot of enormous impacts that can be had through the kinds of activities of urban agriculture. So, I would open it up and for whatever. Did I talk long enough?
We ask if there are any questions from the audience.
Sure. Regarding the productive dialogue, would you be really specific? Why do you think that dialogue is not happening? What is blocking it specifically?
So he asked, what is blocking the productive dialogue in the city? I think that, well, there's a number of factors. One of it is, you know, there's a tight network of decision makers in a town the size of Flint, and they're not always reaching out. I think that urban agriculture does not immediately present a lot of the classic, you know, old school, maybe traditional signs of community development, like you do urban agriculture on a triple lot in the city of Flint, you're not going to be making a lot of money. Like farmers who are doing that are just there because they love it, and they're pioneering people and they're leaders. You can make okay money, but they don't see this as a new General Motors coming in and a big company from outside of Flint coming in and doing that. So I think the movement has struggled to maintain some legitimacy in the eyes as it's crossing over from the human interest story and the you know, community action and that kind of stuff. Isn't that great? To, you know, we want to have access to land. We want to build hoop houses in the city. We want, you know, we want to be part of this game. We know we're part of the mix. We're connected to the waste system. We're connected to the water system. We're connected to, you know, disposal of leaves and all of that thing. You know, we have a role to play in most city systems in some way, but it's not. I think many of the leaders in this town, they don't see themselves in that movement, so I think we get shut off a lot. That's the feeling I got, you know. And maybe it just we haven't had the right venue yet.
Let's talk about Chevy the Hole for a second, because
sure.
You have space, lots of space.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's one aspect to this. I mean, I think the urban agriculture thing is awesome, just generally, and my finger is not on the pulse of Flint as much as some other communities, but I think the brownfield aspect of it is interesting, okay? Because right now, if we could give the city 130 pristine acres of recreational space, they couldn't handle it anyway. And the truth is, the city couldn't. Right now, with Chevy in the Hole, we have to come up with ways to use that space. You know, as I said, we have space and time. And we have some areas of the site that are pretty amenable as far as the environmental health. We have water, right? We're sitting in a bowl, so we have lots of water. Okay, plus we're on the river. So I think that plus we have biomass, right? We're creating biomass from yard waste, maybe from other sources. And, I mean, so I kind of see Chevy in the Hole as kind of this very integrated system of which urban agriculture can be a big part of that. And I'm hearing, so to me it sounds like if you could have 6 acres of land, you would gladly, you know, in hoop houses or greenhouses or even just land or all of the above, you'd be all over it, right? That's what I'm kind of hearing.
Well, yeah, absolutely, especially along the Flint River, where a lot of that land is.
Get that water.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily that you would always need it, and there are lots of good methods like hugelkulture and permaculture techniques and things like that. Like I was always think of like permaculture for big spaces like that, where, you know, I'm like, yeah, let's do a field of asparagus. You don't have to reseed that every year. Like that's just a place where we can go harvest and bring a bunch of asparagus to people. Or, you know, what are those perennial vegetables and herbs that we can grow? What are the orchard situations? But also, you know, the need to have a training farm is huge, because this country is running out of farmers. We're about to turn a generational gap where the average farmer age is in the mid-50s, and you know, none of their kids want to take over the family farm, and we're like losing some really important skills. And you know, people like Greg are passing it on, but you know, Greg also had to get some technical assistance from Michigan State to learn how to, you know, rotate his crops through that hoop house. And that was another kind of like part of our support network that we had to arrange for. If we could bring like the Michigan State Student Organic Farm curriculum to Flint and put in 6 acres with, you know, some coop houses and, you know, whatever, you know, outdoor beds. I mean, you know, like Will Allen in Milwaukee's doing, you know, he's growing on top of like Walmart parking lot. You know, so it's not like it can't be done. And you know, run and add the vermicomposting aspect to what's already being collected, and you're creating something of great value in all that. Yeah, I mean, it would be awesome. We've never been extended an offer to like even have that discussion yet.
Right. I think that you will see that change as Chevy the Whole evolves here. The other aspect
I'll just say one thing about that also. Is,
oh, sorry. Let me just finish one point that I think is really important, is that we have to be mindful of the stigma that's associated with growing things on a contaminated property. That's the flip side of it, right? I mean, we want to use the space, so we've got to be smart about how we control the vectors that lead to that food. You know, and I know I have thought a lot about it, and I've looked at some things that other people have done, have hypothesized as far as growing food on brownfield sites. You know, it's something we need to be mindful at the same time. You know, we need to be smart about.
I actually just wanted to go back to something you showed in your presentation of the complexity of trying to do brownfield projects today. I think one thing we tried to show in our project has to do with this graphic. We just showed this cityscape, what you might see around the city of New York, and all these different kinds of growing spaces. And if you're just walking by that garden or that farm, you see that space. But it's part of a really complex network of resources, institutions, people, materials that need to be in place in order for a farm or garden to exist and to thrive. And actually these guys have talked about a lot of the stuff that's in that network or infrastructure. So on one hand, yes, people are saying they need land, and it would be great to have 5-6 acres here. But you also need the materials to build a hoop house. You need the training to understand what are some of the good growing practices and what are things to avoid. You need to have funding. You need to have a network of other farms and gardens or organizations that can support you in what you're doing. And that exists to a great extent in New York City. It sounds like there's some of that here. But a first step in expanding urban agriculture, we thought, was having people understand it's not just the farm or garden, but it is this really complex system of things that go into making it.
Once you have your infrastructure and you're kind of off and running, let's assume you got seed funding from something. I mean, even the contamination, even something, you know, one of the things about Chevy in the Hole is we wouldn't be able to get it off the ground if it weren't contaminated, because that was a place that we were able to get seed funding. So for right now, we leverage that situation, you know. But once it's kind of established, then it's sustainable. Yes, I mean, right? It's self-sustaining at that point, right?
Urban farming?
Yeah, the urban agriculture.
You know,
it can be.
I mean, it can be. Yeah. Absolutely. There, you know, I met a couple in Rochester, New York. 5 acres, 5 hoop houses, kids in college, taking vacations, you know, once a year, you know, living a good life, and on very little land. So, you know, I know it can be done. It's different in a market like New York versus what you can get for produce in a place like Flint, and how you balance where you market your, like, are you doing it because you want to improve access? You want, you know, people to be able to use their bridge card or food stamps, and you want to charge a fair price. You know, the pricing thing is really, really challenging. But yeah, they're you know, we're testing it right now. Yeah. We're in the middle of it with our cooperative marketing. You know, Greg is, you were selling up at Great Lakes Baptist Technology Center this year. We started 2 satellite farmers markets this year, one on the north side and one on the south side. And it was just like, here, let's take some more market space and get them out there and see how they do. So, the testing the local food economy is something that we're still working on. But what we do know is, there's a $100 million market in Flint for just food stamps. It's like $100 million.
And we have no grocery store, right?
Right. Well, we have technically 3: the Landmark on Pearson Road, the Kroger on the east side, and then is there another one? Anybody?
I think there's another Kroger.
When I saw the assessment, I'm like, there's not 3, but Mr. B's. Yep, you got it, Quincy.
Can I ask a question? I just want.
Let me say this. Now, if you look at the video with myself and Sierra, and we were inside the hoop house, keep in mind that that was produced last February, and it was approximately 18, 19 degrees on the outside. So this is in the dead of the wintertime, but you can see with the video what we were able to produce in that hoop house at that time of the season. And those are what you call your winter crops, and they flourish very well during the coldest times of the month. There was mustard greens in there, turnip greens, collard greens, radishes, and spinach. And those are basically your cold weather crops, which you can sell all year round.
Yeah, and those winter crops actually taste like winter spinach is like so sweet. Like the sugars crystallize those cold weather crops like really nicely.
A couple things. One, Stephen, I wanted to respond to the question about this productive conversation that could happen, and just say that as naive as it may seem in a sense to as outsiders try to try to step into this conversation that we don't have a particular stake in. That actually puts us in a great position, Flint Public Art Project, to actually try to engage participants in this conversation, because we're not trying to pick a winner. We're just trying to get people to talk to each other. So I hope that maybe this is something that we can just slowly start to build trust and openness. And Doug Weiland is in the next panel, so I hope that you can stick around and maybe this is one of the issues that can be discussed. And Jerome, I'm just interested in your thoughts about the urban agriculture scene, your impressions of it, and whether there are any policy recommendations that may not have been pointed out or that may not be obvious from having studied the question in New York for the past year from a pretty rigorous analytical point of view. It's a great book if anybody is interested that we are giving out, that is edited by Jerome based on the study of urban agriculture in New York City.
And the book is free, and I can get lots more. So if anyone wants, anyone wants it, just let me know if we run out today. I think these guys did a really good job of talking about impressions and the value of urban agriculture. One other policy thing that maybe would be useful here, that New York is now just starting to have, is about land availability. So obviously I mentioned land is very precious in New York, it's very expensive. And when you talk to city agencies, they usually will tell you, look, there's no land, there's no vacant land. It's not exactly true. This grassroots organization called 596 Acres in Brooklyn found that there are 596 acres of potentially available city-owned land just in that one of the 5 boroughs of New York. The question is, how do you create a transparent process so you don't have this immediate distrust? And how do you, from the city side, how do you come up with some criteria? So they see it as a rational process that they can justify, okay, here are the ways that we're going to evaluate. Well, number one, here we have to go through this process to understand what we have in our inventory. Because oftentimes agencies don't even know the land that they own because the land they have is so marginal. It's the kind of stuff I was talking about. It's next to elevated rail lines, or it's just little slivers of land that may not be developable. And they just would rather not pay attention to that, so they don't even know anymore that they own it. So that's the first step. The second step is, and that may not be as relevant here where it's very apparent where the land is. The second step is to say, okay, what are some criteria based on very common sense factors that anyone in this room could come up with in a very short period of time? Does it get sun? Is there access to a water line or fire hydrant? Is there serious levels of contamination, or is it the kind that you described where it's just kind of low level and there's ways to get around it? So you put all those together and you ask the agencies to assess based on those criteria what's the prime land for urban agriculture and where does it not compete with other uses. They did this in San Francisco and they managed to find, I think, 130 parcels that they decided to evaluate. San Francisco is a relatively small city compared to New York in terms of size. And then the city actually said, okay, these 13 parcels can be made into new farms and gardens, which may sound small, but just having that process in place allowed the urban agriculture community and city government to really work together on it. And that's what New Yorkers are trying to do right now, is to put that process in place.
This gentleman here.
My question is, first of all, Mr. Gaines, could you tell me a little more about, you talked about the process of, at the beginning, of finding a lot and getting people on either side with buy-ins. Was that lot usually owned by one of the people on the sides, or was it abandoned? Was it owned by the land bank?
It was owned by the land bank.
Okay, and were they helpful, or?
Yes. Once we saw the lot, we went in, we looked at it. We looked at the direction of the sun coming over the lot. That's very important too. We looked at what trees were surrounding that lot, and then once we decided to plant on it, you've got to get water to your crops.
Right.
And what we did was we went through, just say we take a neighborhood, a block, and we went through and we talked to the people on both sides, asked them could we possibly connect a water hose to their home and let us to water the gardens. Some of them went for it and some of them didn't. But at least if we were able to get one homeowner to let us utilize their water and let us store, because we didn't want to keep hauling all of the equipment, the rotillers and the rakes and all that. We didn't want to keep hauling that around every day. Let us store that stuff in their garage, and we got to buy it. Then we went to the rest of the neighbors in that community and told them exactly what we were doing. And because the only thing I was doing was using that property as a training tool for the young people, to give them something to do, okay? And then we told them what we were doing, and once the garden started to produce, we would turn that garden over to that neighborhood.
When you say turn it over to the neighborhood, this is what I find interesting. Who owned it then?
What now?
Like when you say you turn the garden over to the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
Who owned it? Was it the land bank? Was it a neighborhood association? Was it a group of people that I don't know if the law really allows,
Well, basically, we went to the block club president and everything, and actually it worked out really good because the people in that one block area really watched over that garden. If you were to pull up in there and you got a vehicle and they catch you out there in that garden, they're going to run you away from this. Because actually you are stealing from that neighborhood. Okay, but that worked out very, very well. They took ownership of that.
Legal ownership?
Not of the land.
No,
Just the crops.
Okay,
Okay, just the crops. They were able to come in, and once the garden started to produce, that whole neighborhood would come in and pick out from there whatever they want to pick out. That was it.
But you adapted the lot from the land bank, or you bought the?
No, at that time we were just using the lot.
Right.
In
lieu of a crew to mow it.
Instead of a mowing, keeping it mowing and everything. So one of the things that we had to do when I was doing the lots for the land bank was the fact that I had my landscaping crew going around cutting some of these vacant properties. Well, on top of that, one of the things we had to do was we had to establish a garden somewhere. So we decided to take one of the vacant lots, clear it out, and put a garden there.
There are two questions back in this. You had a question, right?
Do you have a proposed plan for Bunch Elementary School? Is one of my questions to you, Mr. Gaines, and to you, Stephen. How much money is being spent buying produce outside of Genesee County?
How much?
How much produce is being spent purchasing outside of Genesee County to the farm?
That comes from outside Genesee.
We got a $1.1 billion food economy in Genesee County, and 940 million of it leaves. So about 94% of every dollar we spend on food goes right out the door.
Quincy, to answer your question, I got a call probably about last week, and I was asked the same question. What was my plans for Bunch School? And to be honest with you, I have no plans for Bunch School. I don't even know where that even come from. I don't know how I got that Mr. Rogers or Greg Hayes was going to do something at Bunch School. Now, I did have a site at Bunch School, but once Bunch School closed, okay, that was the end of that. Other than that, I don't have any plans for Bunch School. Not unless something comes up that I don't know anything about.
So
Okay?
your plan is for Quincy to go farmer.
So what?
That's what I meant.
I didn't hear that last part.
We had a question in the back.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I was interested in knowing more about edible Flint. I'm not really clear on how it's structured and what its full goals and objectives are. And how does that tie into your work with? Are you still with the city?
No.
Okay, not with the city.
Rolling solo. So when Jerome was saying that there are a lot of institutions, and funders and nonprofit organizations and black clubs like all, kind of wanting to be involved with it and in urban agriculture and local food work. We saw the same thing here in Flint. You were there at the extension. We had health department, we had community mental health, we had Ruth Mott Foundation. So there was multiple sector institutions and organizations, but there was no organization whose express mission was dealing with local food. Everybody, had program interests that they wanted to funnel towards doing local food work, whether it was working on the nutrition or education side of it, or producing food, or whatever it was. There was no place, and we started running into complications when we were looking for the friendly organization to serve as the fiscal agent for the money. When grant money's coming in to support an urban farming or urban agriculture kind of project, there should be an organization who has a deep vested interest in local food work that is managing that money, as opposed to just some side thing that they're doing as a favor for this group. So Edible Flint came together as this kind of multiplicity of interest, wanting to all funnel some of their energy towards local food work. It formed as a consensus-based organization, which takes a lot of patience, but is also really important in the beginning, because you really have to check yourself and make sure you heard from everybody. Everybody's voice is in there, whether they like it or not. And then we formed, we have 7 work groups right now. And work groups form when people have the energy to do work on something. There's an access and education work group. There's a garden starters work group which does the garden, the collective seed purchasing, the intro to urban farming and gardening course, arranges for the compost drop-off and tilling services. There's the garden tour that does the annual Edible Flint garden tour, 3 years running now, which has been really great. What else do we have? Then we have some more operational type work groups. We have a communications and getting the word out kind of work group. The one that I convene is we just completed the 501c3 for Edible Flint, so that's all right. Thanks, Mona. And working on just building up, taking care of the budgets. How's the organization going to run, policies and procedures, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the structure. Is a work group structure with a monthly meeting of participants. It's a membership-based organization, so members have a say in the board of directors as well as financial decisions, goal setting, and so on and so forth. On the website, edibleflint.org, first time I've ever plugged it. All of the information about the work group goals and objectives and that kind of thing is on there.
Why don't we take one last question and break for lunch?
I have a comment and a question. In thinking in terms of how to make this movement grow in Flint and have that transparency, one of the things I've been thinking about is there's a lot of, in terms of as a community member, there's a lot of questions that I'm hearing about the safety of land. And overall, I've heard that in Flint, the land is not as contaminated as people might think. And certainly, like was mentioned on sites like Chevy in the Bowl, it's not like there's even distribution. There are areas that could work some that could not. So I guess one comment is I think in Flint, one of the things we need to do is have some kind of communication out across the community about this issue, because there are fears and people just don't know the level of contamination or how to even test for it. So I think that's one of the movements we need to do here. And I guess my other question is, or my question is, can you give some more insight about this very specific policy changes you'd like to see? So when Edible Flint and others really were promoting zoning changes in the city several years ago, I heard hoop houses, curb cuts, in order to get trucks up to allow more access to the actual land for loading, equipment and things like that, chickens and possibly goats. And I know that those are some things under these. Those are some things that will require more conversation, especially around the animal stuff. But I feel like that there's probably more policy changes that could happen, and I'm really interested because I'm part of the Vacant Land Open Space Advisory group for the master planning process, so I'm learning as well.
Can I just ask Greg first, how do you deal with the problem of land potentially being contaminated? Do you grow in the ground or do you grow in raised beds?
You can grow in the ground, but one thing that we do is we have the soil testing, and that can be done free of charge at the MSU Extension Office here in Flint. They will test the soil. That's one thing that you do need to do, is get your soil tested before you put any plants in the ground.
And we've been surprised at how little contamination there really has been. And that's why the co-op has their soil tests results at the stall when they're selling at the market. Like, yeah, we know you think Flint's just completely contaminated across the board, but
it's a perception issue.
So yeah, a lot of it is a perception issue. I think policy-wise, I've been working for the last week in full writing mode. I'm actually drafting a policy document for the city of Flint that should be ready in early November. Yeah, so forthcoming. I'm not giving away the secret.
No spoiler. You won't say what are the top 3 things?
I'm really focusing on soil, water, and policy. Or soil, water, and access to land. So the compost.
So on the water, in terms of cases, in New York, you're not allowed to take water off the street and bring it into a private lot. Here, I don't know if you have the same rule, but in terms of thinking about a curb cut, could you have a curb cut, bring that stormwater onto a site and actually trap it, use it, clean it, and use it for the agriculture? One thing, and then I was wondering in terms of the structure of what you're talking about first with the homeowners, can they donate that water to the land bank and get a tax break? Like, can they treat it as a donation to a not-for-profit? That's something that I think would incentivize homeowners potentially to pitch in, because it sounds like water is really expensive here.
It is.
Yeah, but they probably don't make enough money to itemize on their taxes anyway, so they wouldn't get the tax benefit of that.
Yeah.
It's a great idea, but
well, they have to meter it.
Let me tell you one thing that I did, and it was a little slick. It's one homeowner. They were married, and the gentleman did not want to let us use his water. So, but the wife did. So they was kind of at heads with each other. So what I did was one day I stopped by Walker Farms, and Miss Walker, bless her heart, she had these planters, these big planters with flowers and everything, and I bought a couple of them. And I got over there one morning about 7 o'clock in the morning before they got up, and I set them on their porch. Well, lo and behold, guess what? When we came back over there, later on that day, the wife came out and said, Mr. Gaines, you can use the water.
So it's bribery.
It worked. We got